This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
See, but you held the spotlight. It's those of us in the dark, the ones who just watch, who survive.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz. Today, we're talking about criticism. Now, here's the thing about criticism. If you can't take it, you have no business being in show business, because show business is all about getting and taking criticism. From the moment you put any sort of creative idea on the table, whether in the form of a pitch or a script or a concept package, whether it's the people you're working with or the people you're trying to sell it to, there will be criticism. First thing, you cannot take any of it personally. That will open a door to sheer misery. Now, it doesn't matter that I just told you don't take it personally, because you will. We all do. It's just how it is. But you have to do everything you can to not take it personally. Criticism is a fact of life. The question you need to put front and center is the criticism valid? And it very well may be, but it depends. Does the critic have the least idea what the fuck they're talking about? Because if they don't, then why on earth would you listen to them? By the same token, if the critic does have a valid point, especially if they've articulated it, which is not an easy thing to do, in that case, you better put your adult clothes on and listen. Take that criticism, take it in, and learn from it. Become a better creator as a result. We all use criticism every day in the form of product reviews. How else to help us choose between the shitload of choices in front of us? Which products or services are worth our time and our hard-earned money? Before we even get there, we need to know whose opinions should we trust. There are our friends. We know their tastes, and hopefully we have fairly mutual tastes. So when a friend says, watch this show or listen to this podcast, you'll give it very serious consideration. You trust the reviewer and their integrity. Maybe you subscribe to a newspaper or some other publications that review movies and podcasts and TV shows. Perhaps you look to their reviews to help in that choosing process. In essence, those reviews are entirely neutral walking in the door. Their only allegiance is to their own critical tastes, those critics, and their readers, and followers, and fans. Their only real allegiance is to you. And then there are influencer reviews. Now, they can be entirely valid too, no argument. But there can be a problem with their reviews too. With more than a few of them, one way or another, they're on the payroll of the companies whose products they're reviewing. Well, that ain't kosher, and it doesn't smell too good either. That's really more an informed opinion than it is a serious review. Hey, look, maybe that's all you want, but it's your time and your money. If I could have my way, every review of everything I do or did would glow like the sun. But that wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be honest either. I'm quite sure. Hey, I made Bordello of blood, didn't I? All right, preamble over. Our guest today is our old friend, entertainment journalist and movie critic, Kristen Lopez. Kristen has written and worked for The Wrap, Variety, and IndieWire. Currently, she's overscheduled working on two books. One, a history of how Hollywood has depicted characters with disabilities, and the other is an oral history of Tales from the Crypt. Kristen is a huge fan of Crypt, so obviously I completely trust her critical viewpoint, even when it's actually critical, because I trust her. Hey, here's Kristen. We're here today to talk about what the hell is happening to film criticism. But before we dive into that, I want to get a sense of you as a critic. And I think the best way to get a sense of you as a critic, Kristen, is to read what you've written. Recently, you wrote a terrific piece on Substack titled It and the Horrors of Childhood, or Why I Identify with Eddie Kaspbrak So Much. And in that terrific piece you wrote, and I absolutely recommend, I highly recommend that you subscribe to Kristen on Substack. If you look at it as chuckles per per dollar spent, it's an incredible bargain. Uh, in this piece, Kristen wrote, "The films that have stuck with me the deepest are small town stories with characters that feel like they own a little sliver of who I am."
Sometimes I can write a good line. It takes a lot of work and toiling, but ooh, sometimes I have the ability.
But that's not just a line you wrote, that's a line you felt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's why we love movies, right? It's why we build our personality around movies. It's why we learn things from movies because we feel, movies are the first influencers, I think, or pop culture is really the first influencer, in the sense that like you feel like something. You know a filmmaker from the films they make. You know a celebrity from the persona that they create. So, it's something that unfortunately can be abused, and I'm writing a whole book right now about what disability looks like in film and how that taught me to see myself. But yeah, I think that for me as a critic, what I come to, and there's discourse back and forth about how your own personal views and your personal experience shouldn't inform your criticism, but it's impossible. I think it's impossible because films create us, and who we are, and we determine so much based on what we like and don't like in the film space.
You said that you adore, well, Eddie is the main reason you adore it. He reminds you so much of yourself, less as a child and more as you currently are.
Yeah, I mean, Eddie and It is a hypochondriac, and I'm very much a hypochondriac. Like WebMD is my friend. Every mole could be cancer. I'm not really, sure about that. Like every
To
single thing.
to be fair, life has been less than fair to you in terms of what it
Sure.
has heaped upon you.
Yeah, I mean, as a disabled person, I definitely came with more challenges. My mom will tell you I keep a list of all of the things that I was not allowed to do as a child, that I probably would not, my mom has joked like, well, you can do them now. Like if you wanted to, you really could. I'm like, no, the time is done. My dreams of being a world-class ribbon dancer are over. My wrists aren't as pliant as they used to be. So it's definitely one of those things where, to watch Eddie and It, I'm like, oh, okay, so that's what, I often joke that I think I was more fearless as a kid than I was as an adult. But at the same time, when things went wrong for me as a kid, they went really wrong, so it was less, when people joke about like childish consequences, mine often were way worse than the usual.
You close by saying that for all his rationalizing, he's never a coward.
Yeah, I think that, and that's, I think, what makes it such a fun, timeless kind of horror film is the fact that it showcases I think what I always notice about it is that unlike 80s movies, and Alan, you have more experience about the 80s than I do. I experienced the 80s through film, but the 80s are often presented as this real like hedonistic time, especially for, young people. You have a whole genre of 80s movies that are about, driving around and sex and all these things, but it is one of the few movies that I think I appreciate more now as a millennial living in 2024, because it often says like, was it this time of hedonism, or is it this time when we actually should have been more concerned about what children were doing? And it's a time of being of the unknown and, being more circumspect about things. And I think that's what I appreciate, and about film in general. Film often makes you feel like you're less crazy. It gives you this nice, warm little home that you can, and ironically, I was been rewatching Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House this week too, which is another like small town confined to one location type of story. And I think what it does so well is, yeah, it showcases that, you know, you can be a hypochondriac, you can be, an anxious person, but when, the chips are down, like you learn how to find a form of strength. It might not be one where you're like leading the fray, but you find your inner gumption and you're able to succeed.
So movies were always a thing.
Yeah.
Were there particular critics as you began to formulate your own film taste? And as I know, I began to read film critics to get a sense of, well, is my opinion good or bad? At first you want some affirmation that your taste is, you're not, taste up your ass, you,
Yeah.
and when you suddenly find that a professional critic whose writing you like either agrees with you or can challenge your thinking about a movie, you suddenly begin to, those critics become an important part of your film experience too. Were there any film critics that helped formulate your sense, your idea of movies, but also your idea of film criticism?
Yeah, I mean, I was a nerd as, growing up. I read a lot of film books. And I read, Roger Ebert's Great Movies series, and I read Pauline Kael, and I read A.O. Scott and Kenneth Turan, and you know, I appreciated them more as film history books, in the sense of like, these are the movies you should watch. That if you want an example of great filmmaking, you should watch this. So it took me a minute to realize that they were actually compendiums, and especially Roger Ebert stuff, that were compendiums of reviews he'd actually written at the time. And I realized that I kind of might be at odds with certain critics when I read Roger Ebert's book. I forget the exact title, but it was about movies he hated. And it was reviews of all these movies that he had hated. And he talks about how much he hates the film North with Elijah Wood from the 90s. And it's become this big thing that this is like
What film?
yeah, that this is his
What's the name of the film?
North. So yeah, it's, if you haven't seen it in a minute, and most people haven't, it's about Elijah Wood as a little boy who essentially wants to divorce his parents. And so he sues them and goes on this journey, and meets a bunch of different people who might want to be his parents, ultimately realizing that his parents might, who were Jason Alexander and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, might not have been so bad after all. And as somebody that was a kid in the 90s and that watched that movie and found that movie very fun and silly, I was a bit at odds. I was like, well, it's not the worst thing ever. I don't really know why you're crafting a whole thing around, this one movie. That ended up undoing a lot of people's careers because of the reviews it got. And I realized at that point that, a lot of the critics that I liked were fantastic writers and they were fantastic critics, but they weren't really me. The majority of critics were white men who were older. Pauline Kael was kind of the de facto woman, but she had stopped writing for a significant amount of time, and I think she had passed, when I started to really get into, film. So there weren't really a lot of women for me to look at, in terms of criticism, certainly not disabled women critics, so I realized at a certain point, I started when I realized I was going to get, have to graduate high school and get a job. And I was like, well, criticism, like, I have to, like, what do you need for that? And I Googled what Roger Ebert's qualifications were. And he has an English degree. Like, he doesn't have a degree in criticism. Like, no one gave him, he didn't have a film background. And I realized that a lot of critics actually didn't often have highfalutin degrees.
I
which
don't even know what was Pauline Kael's
I
background.
that I don't have offhand. Let me see if I can find it because yeah, it was I definitely realized like okay, well, these are incredibly smart people. Yes, they're fantastic writers, but they don't I realized that there wasn't really any type of special, credential. It's not like being a doctor,
Oh yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
you don't necessarily need to have a card that says,
To
critic,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah. To judge by a lot of Pauline Kael's work, and I, she was really the first person, the first critic that I suddenly realized film criticism actually is a kind of art all by itself. But she, in a movie review, she would mention 20 other movies,
yeah,
and she would reference all these other movies. And there was a point at first I thought, God, it's like she arrives at the movie theater with all her baggage, and she gets out,
yeah,
she goes into the movie theater. But as I've gone through, as I've gone through my life and watched more and more movies, I really understand that is, yeah. How can you not watch a movie and feel all the other movies that influenced it because movies are that
yeah.
influential?
Yeah, I mean, Pauline Kael, to answer your question, she studied at UC Berkeley. And she studied philosophy and literature and art, but she eventually dropped out. And she got her first review by being overheard at a coffee shop by a magazine editor, and he just gave her an assignment. That's how she did it.
Right, right.
And
She had a good opinion, well crafted.
yeah. And I've gotten, a lot there a couple years ago I tweeted, of course, about how I really missed people having some sort of cursory film background or film knowledge in order to write. And I don't and I mean I took a lot of film classes in college, but I'm not a film major, but I understand composition, cinematography, production design, and how that enhances or detracts from a film, or I have the foundations of film knowledge, and it helps that yes, I have a lot of film history, but it became a really controversial topic on social media that I was telling people, well, if you don't have a film background, you can't write criticism. And that's not at all what I was saying. It was more like I want people to know, the foundations. I mean, film criticism requires two things, which is the ability to write and the ability to deconstruct film. And if you don't have background knowledge in either of those things, you're just writing a Yelp review.
Well, you need to be informed about the
Yeah,
thing that you're reviewing, and really, and and even there are degrees of being informed. You can in reviewing a cake, you can review the icing, the sprinkles on top of the icing, or you can review the cake. And an awful lot of reviewing, really, they're talking about the icing and the sprinkles, and really they might touch upon the cake, but they don't understand how the cake was made or why the cake is no good
yeah. I mean, to continue with
or
the
why
cake,
it's great. I'm sorry, or
yeah,
why it's also good, because it can also be a good cake
yeah.
too.
To continue with that, I mean, that's not to say that you don't need to appreciate, the frippery, the sprinkles and the frosting, and understand why those things add or detract from the overall experience. It's the fact though that, if you are saying something is bad, you should be able to explain to me why it's bad, and understand why the film, using all of the things, the techniques it employs, ultimately is giving you something great or terrible. And I'm one of those, I say it a lot. Reviews that I have to write about movies that I love are the hardest for me to write, because it's often hard for me to just explain why I love something. I joke that I just want to put in all caps, like, just go see it. Don't take my word, just go see it and then tell me how awesome it is. And that's I but that challenges me as a writer, to be like, well, you have to explain why it's good. And that is really, really hard. Movies that are terrible, it's easy to, for me at least, to say why they're bad. I can write a 1,600-word review that's just all
Okay,
about why something's terrible.
you've put it on the table, Kristen.
Yeah.
What was the hardest good review you ever had to write?
I mean, I just wrote it today. It's gonna my most recent, at least, that is coming out tomorrow is I saw Conclave, the Edward Berger um Pope movie. And I'm a lapsed Catholic. I don't think I had on my bingo card that I would love a movie about the papacy, and find it to be just this really taut, like 1970s-esque political thriller. Like it feels like you're watching, 3 Days of the Condor if you're watching this movie about a bunch of cardinals like standing in dark rooms, smoking cigarettes, talking about like the church's future. It's so good though. It's so good. It's so brisk and it's so juicy. It's very much like I keep saying, if this movie had been made in '94, it would have worked just as fantastically then as it did now. And you probably could have cast the same people, and it would have still worked. It's so good. But it was like pulling blood from a stone just to be like, okay, but why is Stanley Tucci really good? Like why do I love that it's, got all this ceremony to it? Why do I love that it's as unsubtle as a brick to the face?
Okay. By contrast, what was all right, a movie that just a horrible movie. It deserved every horrible word you said about it, and it was a delight to write.
Oh
Is anything
gosh.
snap to mind that you
I mean, I've written so many. I've written my fair share of bad reviews. I reviewed, again, just something off the top of my head that was fairly recent. I reviewed the Amy Winehouse movie that came out a couple months ago, and that was biopics are always a problem. But this one was just like, what if Amy Winehouse's issues were all boiled down to the fact that she couldn't have kids? And that, as a single woman that doesn't have children, I was like, oh, we're going back to that story again. Cool. Thank you for reminding us that we are
that
only
was her
as good as.
that was her demon?
Pretty much, yeah, yeah. It pretty much just said like sorry to spoil this horrible movie for everybody, but it pretty much ends with her going upstairs and playing her death almost like a suicide because she lost the love of her life and he went and had children with someone else. And you're just like, that's actually historically inaccurate for starters. And also like really, really not the best, way. But then this is also a movie that like rolls its eyes at feminism like it's the ultimate F word. So, and it's, directed by a woman of all things. So, it's nice. It's a nice cruel irony. But that one, I knew I was gonna not like it, and I had to preface like I knew this was not going to be good. But here's also why it's awful. So,
Anything quotable that you wrote? You thought, oh, that was a good one, Kristen.
gosh. Nothing that comes off the top of my head. I mean, if we're talking about lines that, I have to like smile that I came up with, I wrote a review a long time ago on my classic film blog for the Robert Redford movie Brubaker of all things. And I watched it, and if you've seen, it's been a long time since I've seen Brubaker, so I don't know the plot inside and out, but he's supposed to be like amongst all of these like hardened criminals and whatnot. He looks like Robert Redford. And I remember writing the line that says he stands out in the crowd like a Christmas package at the city dump. And I still am just like, yeah, yeah, that's it's pretty good. I'll
Bravo,
keep that one.
bravo. That's a good one. About Smile 2, the headline, bigger, bolder, and insufferably boring.
Yeah, yeah. I'm terrible at
Uh,
headlines, just in general. So that was a good one.
I thought that was a good one. About Joker, Folie à Deux, you wrote, let's see, one sour note after another, a dark look into the psyche of those who glorify and celebrate mass murderers or anyone causing chaos under the name of freedom. Well put together. And you said it's an ugly look at fan service obsession and toxicity. If Phillips is done with these movies, it couldn't come soon enough.
I stick by that. If anything, what I'm appreciating now, I was definitely afraid to review Joker 2 because I remember when the first Joker came out, and I wrote about it from a disability perspective, and I got several, death threats on social media. I know other women that wrote about it that got, sexual harassment and just really violent comments. And now what's funny is how many people read the review for the sequel and they were like, "Oh, well, we all knew, why did you expect it to be any good? We all knew the first movie was trash." And I was like, wait a minute, were you the same people that were threatening to kill me online because I didn't love the first one? You don't all get to go back and collectively say the first movie was bad, you were there, own it.
Well, it's funny because you say that about Smile too, and at the end of the review, you write everything you liked about the first Smile isn't here, and if anything, its sequel might just make you question whether the original was any good at all.
And I say that as somebody that liked the first one. I only saw the first one about a month or two ago for the first time, and I enjoyed it. But ooh, seeing the sequel the other night, which I've been told by other people, I am incredibly wrong on my thoughts on Smile 2. But nope, I still don't. I don't want to see it again to prove whether time has changed. I will not be rewatching.
Is it is it essential to have a background in movie? Not, I don't mean in making movies, but in a knowledge of movies, of watching movies, to really to write about movies?
Does if you don't know what cinematography is, and you don't know why the camera being, in focus is important, then you're coming at it at a severe disadvantage. If you don't know what makes a good acting performance versus, a bad one, you're always going to come up two or three, things short. And I think what we're seeing now with film criticism under the influencer age is that people are so focused on, you know, not even necessarily witty turns of phrase or good writing. It's just being first, so the reviews are just very are stating the obvious. The performances are good because the performances are the easiest thing to judge. It looks pretty, so you don't have to go into cinematography or production design, um it's just the very bare bones obvious elements of what makes a movie. So you do need a bit of a background, not just in film technique, but also storytelling,
I was thinking really more along the lines of the history itself. Like, all right, do you need to know who James Whale was?
I think it helps. There are there are people that come to me and they're like, I don't see nearly as many movies as you. And, I think what's funny now is that we joke a lot. I was at my previous employer, we joked about the fact that most of the people that were watching content or writing about it are under 30. So anything before the 1980s, they don't really know, or they're discovering late in life. And so I do think, I come at things with film history if only because I want to keep reiterating to people that you should be seeking out things that are, early, but also because most filmmakers crib from the best. I've talked to my fair share of filmmakers, and they've all talked about other filmmakers, other films that they've homaged slash stolen content from. And if you don't know that something is a direct homage to Citizen Kane, then you're gonna miss part of this, what makes the story interesting. I think for me, it's always a good, or it can be a good or a bad thing to discover, Conclave, to go back to my Lord and Savior Conclave, you know, the fact that it does borrow from the themes and the tone of something like 3 Days of the Condor, the Parallax View, that for people reading my stuff, they're going to be like, I love that movie, I want to go see this. Or on the other side, I've never seen those movies, and if I like this, then I should go watch those, So it's about keeping the continuum flowing.
All right, let's play a little thought experiment. If you had to recommend three movies to a young person with, really, who movies before 2000 don't
Hmm.
exist, but three pre-2000 movies. Here's what you need to know about movies. What three would you suggest?
Oh gosh, that's so tough. And somebody's gonna yell at me that I didn't
Of
include
course,
this. Uh,
and I'll
I mean, Casablanca is the big one. I don't even particularly love Casablanca, but if you're looking for great examples of the studio system that kept film going from the 19 teens to the 1960s, it's got a great example of big stars, thoughtful production design, black and white cinematography. It's a really great beginner film, for people that are into old Hollywood. And I think it's essential. I mean, I always Titanic is another big one. Again, if we're talking about coming at needing a bit of film history, you don't understand why Titanic works as well as it does if you haven't seen some of those big sweeping romances, your Dr. Zhivagos and your Romeo and Juliets. You need, and it's a great example of modern filmmaking taking 19, studio era beats and contemporizing them at the time for 97. And then the third, ooh, geez. I'm trying to think of something there like in the 1970s, 1980s that would be worth it. Gosh, why am I not realizing what movies are at this point? And I've been writing about them.
I'll throw out a couple.
Go
Butch
for it.
Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
That was a movie that I just watched for the first time, I think about a year or two ago. Yeah, I know.
You never saw Butch
I'd never
Cassidy
seen it.
before?
I knew the ending. I knew the ending. And
Well,
I knew
yeah.
I knew that, which is funny because if anybody reads my review of the George Clooney Brad Pitt movie Wolves, the ending is the ending of Butch Cassidy, only it's not good. But again, that's such a great example of the 1970s, fast and dirty, dark storytelling, no happy ending. And I mean, you have the old guard of filmmaking, Paul Newman, you have the newer guard with Robert Redford. It's
star
quintessential.
power,
Yeah, star
sheer
power. Yeah,
star power. Just two guys who are
yeah,
on screen really most of the movie. And really, it's not about much. It's
yeah,
really, who are those guys?
yeah.
It's a chase scene for
The
most of
Sting
it.
is another good example of that too. I mean, The Sting is a movie I defy anybody to tell me the plot of The Sting in a sentence or two. You really
Oh,
can't.
it's convoluted by
Yeah.
design, but it all
Yeah.
works. Look, the whole point is you get to the end of the movie. There's some great little plot twists toward the end,
Yep.
so that even the audience goes, "Wait, what? He was that?" And what? Oh my God, you're kidding!
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the audience also too the audience also gets taken in by the con.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
So
another,
it's
and I think I tend to find connections, if we're talking about classic era films that people need to see that I think would be interesting, gateway films for younger viewers. I also throw out, I mean, I'm a big Cameron Crowe fan. Fast Times at Ridgemont High is a classic, and it's on the cusp of 1970s kind of authentic cinema, the kind of hedonism of the 1980s. It's made for teens, pretty much by teens because Cameron Crowe was so young at the time. And it's got such a great entry into the 80s. And aside from the fact that, the actors now are older, it's pretty timeless. Aside from the fact that there's like no cell phones, and maybe some bad hair, but the themes are still very revolutionary in the sense of like teenage becoming and female sexuality. And, it was presented as very bleak, for the 80s. Of course, things only got bleaker in certain teen movies after that, but it's again a good gateway film.
I think you answered that question. Uh, among your recent reviews, there's one that I for Honora, Sean
Yeah.
Baker's new movie Honora. Now, I don't know that I've seen a Sean Baker movie.
I have seen Tangerine. I recommend Tangerine's a great Christmas movie if you're looking for just a loud, brash Christmas movie. It's set during Christmas in LA. It's really, really good. I've had a couple people tell me I should watch The Florida Project. I will get to it, I promise. But other than that, yeah, it's Anora is such a if you're looking for again, kind of blending of genres, it is a 1940s screwball comedy with a sex
You
worker
you
twist.
you call it a screwball comedy of errors.
Yeah, it really is, it's and it blends, you know, a Barbara Stanwyck 40s movie with Oscar Wilde and, just adds a heavy dose of stripperness to it. It's fantastic. It's so well conceived.
As a I'm old. I'm, I'm 65, but so the movies that my classics like Preston Sturges. So when you
Yeah,
reference Preston Sturges, I think, well, that sounds awesome. Really, Preston Sturges
yeah,
operating now. I would that for me as somebody reading film criticism. Uh, to me that suggests that you know what you're talking about, and the reason that these movies endure is not just because TCM plays them, but because when movies got invented, it it really it's the most powerful thing human beings ever created.
yeah,
The moving image, the power to change people's minds, to lie to them,
yeah,
to convince them that things that aren't are
yeah,
is incredible. And it's I know in my life from the first time that I grasped the power of these when I was a little kid, when I was 6 years old at Michael Gold's birthday party, and his dad on a Super 8 projector put on from the library. I think we were able to rent Super 8 movies from the library in Baltimore County, where I grew up, and he played Laurel and Hardy's Big Business. And in Big Business, Laurel and Hardy are Christmas tree salesmen in Southern California, where it does not look like Christmas.
of course.
So right off the bat, to an East Coast kid, that was just hilarious. Even though that really, I guess that's
No,
part of the joke, but they ultimately they're not having a good day, and finally they go to James Finlayson's house, and a bad day gets worse, and they end up taking apart his house, and he takes apart their truck. But the structure of the bits growing into this monumental bit, it wasn't just the comedy, but it was really the way the whole thing was put together, bringing you to a moment of ultimate crisis, and then it's over.
yeah,
I don't know. I was 6 years old, and something about that stuck with me. And it wasn't just how incredibly funny it was. Something
yeah,
in me grasped, I don't know.
yeah. It's I mean, movies have such a huge impact on our conception of reality. And there are people that move to Los Angeles because, I mean, there's a whole genre of LA movies, right, that show Los Angeles as either, this dream factory or this dark seedy, world of murder and mayhem. I mean, you can get an LA movie for what ails you, but people travel here, based on the false promise, that film has given them, for good and for ill. People learn about, you know, the sex from film, and that kind of plays into their whole conception based on, how things move, how things happen, and that I think, you can people talk about, well, you shouldn't take the movies as truth, and that's very true. But unfortunately, people do. You learn about marriage and divorce from movies. You learn about death from movies, so to say that I always laugh when people say movies don't have a responsibility to the truth. and they don't, there's a whole, history of film that has been about, happy endings and high fantasy. But at the same time, going through that, you also have to grapple with film's history of racism, film's history of misogyny and ableism and all these things now, that people say, well, now you can't even have fun going to the movies. Well, you can. It's just understanding that film, as much as we love it, is selling us a they're selling us something.
That was always the point.
Yeah,
When every year when we get to the Oscars, what everyone forgets is that this was created as a way to generate publicity.
yeah,
The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, that academy is a creation out of someone's head.
yeah.
No academy. I mean, yes, there is now, but really, then it was just a word. It was a word
It
choice.
was it was a way for them to have a really good party and, pat themselves on the back for job well done. And I mean, there are some people that say the Oscars are a popularity contest. There's all these
How
different
can you
reasons for what.
compare things that you really it's if you really sit down and think about it, it's a strange thing to ask. Compare these things that really aren't comparable and choose one that's the best of them all. What are you talking about? Why does there have to be a best? What
Yeah,
what they discovered when they named Wings the winner of the first best picture, it it suddenly made people go back to the movie theater and watch it again.
yeah,
And they realized that there was value in a movie being a best picture. And
yeah.
that's what it is.
And I think, there's a reason. I think what was in that first Oscar ceremony too, there was, the most artistic movie, which went to Sunrise, and then there was the actual,
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes,
the
yes.
popular movie, which we've been chasing at the Oscars for decades since. It's why we expanded the pool to 10 nominees in the hopes of finding this amorphous blend between artistic achievement and movies people are quote unquote actually seeing.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, Sunrise is one of the most amazing movies ever made. Murnau Sunrise is really
Yeah,
wow. And that's when I think of movies that people should see. Sunrise is one of those movies where all right, everyone thinks silent movies, well, there's no talking, so
yeah,
and it's black and white usually, so it just for most people that's a very foreign experience. And silent movies are actually incredible
yeah,
storytelling experiences.
yeah. That you
Wow.
really that you really can't replicate, these days. Like, people find it hilarious that Mary Pickford played a child until she was like 36. But to watch a Mary Pickford movie, you understand why she was able to do that. I have a whole section in my book that I'm writing about, Lon Chaney, and to watch an actual Lon Chaney senior movie, the plots are bananas for starters. They're hilarious. But his commitment to, the bit of being the characters that he played, is fantastic. The Man Who Laughs with Conrad Veidt is so heartbreaking. But then you can watch something like, Why Be Good with Colleen Moore, and it's a comedy, and she's very funny. It's very modern for 1920 standards. It's all silent. Or a Marion Davies movie. You can find the emotion in a lot of these films. It's just they require a bit more of your attention, as I've discovered, because you can't look at your phone. You can't focus on other things, otherwise you miss essential elements.
I think the boxing scene in City Lights is
Yeah,
still incredibly funny.
yeah,
It's just ingenious. And the ending of City Lights is the epitome of personal tragedy
yeah.
in a in an image.
I mean,
Words would
exactly.
not make that better.
No, and I mean, City Lights and I have a complex history because of, Virginia Sherrill's characters,
Yes, yes,
the
yes, yes,
the
yes,
blind
yes,
girl.
yes, yes.
But I think what makes that movie still stand out is the fact that so many of these actors, like a Charlie Chaplin, like Lon Chaney, created characters first and persona second. You didn't know what Charlie Chaplin was doing in his personal life,
Just
unless
as
it
well.
unless it was making headlines. You didn't know what Lon Chaney Sr. was doing at the end of the day, unless he was at a public appearance. There was a remove from these actors, and you never believed that the characters, well, I don't know if I'm sure people believed Lon Chaney was the characters he was playing, but you didn't know, and then even once the studio system really takes hold in the 20s and 30s and 40s, actors had very cultivated images. They were giving very structured interviews to press. There was nothing that was not controlled by a studio. You did not know one damn thing about these people that they did not want you to know, and I think that's something that we see now, only it's everybody, right? Everybody now is cultivating their own image. Everybody now is curating their persona. It's more controlled than ever, and yet everybody's chasing this one thing, which is like, I have to be my most authentic self, but not authentic with a big A. You want to be the conception of what you think people are going to buy into.
Although back in the day, there were some people on the press side of the equation who wielded enormous power.
Oh yeah.
Hedda Hopper, Llewellyn Parsons.
Yeah, I mean, Hearst in general, and I think that's what's interesting, in talking about the changes now between the media and the entertainment industry, is that, you know, both sides had to play ball, in certain ways. Hedda and Luella cultivated relationships with these people. And if you pissed them off, they were going to write shitty articles about you. But if you kept them in your good graces and you maintained a relationship, Hedda Hopper was invited to parties at these people's houses. Like, there was a transactional friendship that existed, between them, that kept the trains on the tracks. Hearst was very much a figure that was able to destroy Orson Welles' life by posting all this stuff and, not doing publicity for Citizen Kane. At the same time, him and Marion Davies at Hearst Castle invited all of these Hollywood people to dinner. Like, they interacted with these people far more, and nowadays, you would never, I don't know any celebrity that would tell a Washington Post journalist, like, come to my house on a Sunday. You're not going to write anything. Like, just come on over. That would never happen.
Indeed. Why does movie criticism matter?
I think it matters in the sense that, there's a financial element. People don't want to spend their money on something that is not good. So there's that on the, surface level. You want to know if something's worth investing your time and your money into. On the other hand, film criticism reminds people why movies matter and why movies are flawed. I think what people respond to in my criticism is the fact that if I think a movie is, misogynist, I will tell people that, like, you're gonna have to compartmentalize the women in here are really one note, or if something's ableist, I will tell people that, they want to know that somebody understands the issues inherent in film, and is letting people know that, and I think at the same time, the best critics, like a Roger Ebert, like a Pauline Kael, you know, wield influence in a way where people do kind of feel like they know you, like, this person likes this movie, so therefore I think I will like this. So you're not only helping somebody figure out what to spend their precious time on, but at the same time they're reading you being like, I understand why this movie matters and why this movie matters to the critic, or why it doesn't.
Wow.
Which is why I hate writing articles all the time about how it's doomed and we're all screwed
Yeah,
thanks to
yeah, I
influence.
mean, all right, which kind of brings me to the last question I had, which is, well, what separates film criticism from what's happening now?
Well, what's happening now, is it's the rise of the influencer, and it's something that's always existed to a degree. We've seen street teams, right? Back in the 2000s and the 90s, street teams, which was like people that would go from like shopping malls and remind you that this thing existed, usually bands. But now what we're seeing with the rise of social media is that studios are courting and catering to influencers. These are not people that have any type of critical background, and in many instances don't have any film connection. It's just they're really good at cultivating an audience and selling stuff. So what we're
They're
seeing
good
now,
at social media.
they're good at social media. They're good at selling a persona of them on social media. And what we're seeing is that, these influencers are seeing movies early. They're telling people to go see it because most of it is essentially pay for play. So they're getting stuff in return for a positive review. And it's shutting out a lot of actual critics from movies and opportunities that they need to do their job. So you're seeing influencers interview celebrities, you're seeing them at premieres, you're seeing them on red carpets, like they are film critics, only on steroids. And most of the
Except
time,
the film critics who were being paid.
exactly, they're not even, yeah, they're essentially there to just be corporate shills. I mean, that's
Yes, yes,
essentially
yes,
what
yes.
they are.
I
I I wrote an article a couple last year, and one of the influencers I talked to, I said, "Well, are you able to say if you don't like something?" And they're like, "Well, I would never say I don't like something. I just wouldn't say anything." Right. So you're saying that you wouldn't say anything bad. If it's not positive, then you're
so you
not.
can't, so you cannot be honest.
Yeah. And that's really what they want, and that's really the unspoken agreement, which is the influencer is not going to be honest,
Right.
and the studio is going to be happy about that. Either way, they get butts and seats because the influencer has the ability to generate audiences, and right now studios are very, very fearful. The movie theater has not come back in the same way as it has pre-pandemic. So they're working every angle they can to get people to go into a theater. If an influencer tells you they're gonna do it and they have 10 million followers, even if 10% of that following comes to the movies, that's you're in a better position. And even if the influencer doesn't say anything because they don't like it, they're still going to get people to go see it because they're at least going to mention that it's a thing. Whereas a film critic is going to be honest. There and newspapers are dying. Digital is definitely, with the pivot to video, there's studios don't find any value in film critics unless it is award season. And then you will get, critics groups are invited to all this stuff. But even then, it's purely for awards voting, so it's not even really the criticism of it. It's to get their vote so that they can put that on their poster and say this movie, swept all the critics' orgs.
What's the solution?
I wrote about that and I've asked some questions about it, and there aren't any. I had another influencer, a very sweet girl, tell me, well, there's no reason that film critics can't just get on social media and do what they do online, just make videos. And it's not as simple as transitioning, it's not as simple as pivoting to video, because that's not what the goal is. The belief is that the studios are limiting access because they want omnipotent praise. And even if a critic is on social media and is gaining a following, the access is still going to be contingent on what they're saying. So, I know a lot of people have talked about the possibility of criticism transitioning into more film analysis and doing more kind of long form essays about themes and kind of cultivating more articles as opposed to reviews. Some people have talked about transitioning to academia, and teaching, which is academia is rife with its own problems right now and a lack of jobs, but that is an option. And other people have just kind of been like, well, it's my hobby. It's never going to make me rich. I'm never going to, get get to be where I'm never going to get to be Roger Ebert and Pauline Kael. So I'm happy with the few movies I get to see, and that's where I'm at. And that's unfortunate because there are so many people that are pivoting to other industries or leaving journalism behind, and I do worry that in the next, 10 years, it's going to look like it did in the 90s, which was, if you had to name a handful of critics, you could probably name three or four. They all worked for big newspapers or big trades, and they were all men. So I do worry about whether we're going to see a backslide into, marginalized critics just being like, there's no benefit anymore, and we're going to be talking in 20 years again about, film criticism doesn't have any people of color. Film criticism doesn't have any women. So it's always been dark. It just feels like a darker time than it usually is.
Nonetheless, we need it.
We do. I mean, people assume that film criticism is a bunch of entitled journalists who just want to talk to celebrities, or just want to see movies early. I joke all the time about how when I got into this job, if I could just see movies early, I would be so happy. But film critics are journalists in many instances. They're doing double duty. They're writing other things about these movies. So to say that film criticism doesn't have any bearing anymore is to say that film journalism doesn't have any bearing anymore. And unless we're all doing news aggregation, it's not important. And you're going to lose a lot of really good writers because of that.
Where can people find you, Kristen? There's your Substack, Christomania,
Yeah,
which will
it's at kristenlopez.substack.com. I'm on all social media because of course I am at Kristen Lopez 88. And you can find my official website at kristenklopez.com.
and of course we shouldn't forget Ticklish Business, your incredible film podcast that's
Yeah.
always an incredible delight to listen to.
It is, yeah. We just did an episode on The Shining to close out Halloween, so you can find that wherever you get podcasts. We also have a Patreon that does all sorts of extra stuff that I don't have any time for, but I still do it, which is at patreon.com/ticklishbiz.
It's a perilous time to be doing what we're all doing because we all have to figure out ways to monetize
Yep,
what we do.
chasing that
And
almighty dollar.
it is, but you got to pay the rent. And the thing is, the time it takes to create the content is one thing. The time it takes to sell it.
Yep.
Oh my God,
Or sometimes
that's
the
the
time
killer.
it takes to put it together, like editing and look at your favorite YouTuber or TikToker and notice. I mean, that's again an element of film criticism. Notice how many cuts are in a 2-minute video, and how closely they're editing certain things. That's always the hard thing for me when I'm, yelling at my phone trying to edit a video on TikTok is just like, you know, how is it so rehearsed with all these TikTokers? Well, that's because they have people that can go through and edit everything very closely.
Oh,
It's
don't get me
delightful.
started. It's nice having staff, but yes, well, my two friends, James Janice and Chelsea Rebecca, who have a website and a podcast called Dead Meat, where they do the body counts in horror movies usually, and every single death they review it. They have 6 million subscribers.
Oh, lucky.
That 6 million subscribers they have advertisers
Yeah.
and staff.
Yeah.
This bought them a house,
Yeah.
an actual house out way out in the valley, but it bought them a house. So I take great comfort from that because, if you can do it, I can do it. That means at some point it's possible.
That's the dream, right? I mean, that's we talk about what film is selling us and what influencers are selling us, and I know that there's a huge increase, and I every couple of months I read a story about this influencer only works 10 hours a week and makes, $150,000 a year. But what people, and that's selling the dream, right? That you can, quit your job and podcast full time, or you can quit your job and do YouTube videos all day. But what people don't understand, and they don't tell you, is the consistency of it, building a following, the time it takes to produce. And that's really what you are, is a producer,
Indeed.
and that is something that I'm interested to see what the next 10 years looks like, because we're either going to get an influx of producer directors, who have been molded on TikTok and, growing their brand, entering filmmaking. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like it's something that's going to blossom in the next couple of years.
One way or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Whether we like it or not.
What was it, the name that George W. Bush had for Karl Rove? Turd Blossom. And on
Exactly. It's either something to celebrate or mourn, and I'm not really clear on what, but as I talk about on the Substack, we're at this point, we're just welcoming our new overlords with open arms. And I don't know how to feel about it, but I can't avoid it either. So
see one more incredibly quotable line. You gotta follow Kristen. It's hey, and subscribe. It's worth it. Literally, she is such a lovely writer. She's funny, she's insightful, and she's got a point of view that's so particular, and she's so right.
oh,
But
thank
that's a
you.
whole other thing. Hey, I'm a fan. She's doing a book about Tales from the Crypt. What do you want? I'm such a whore.
I mean, exactly. I was gonna say, yeah. I mean, you're biased because I've been working
Absolutely.
the Tales from the Crypt book. So
I'm biased, but I'm also right.
I will take that. I will
There
take
you
that.
go.
So
Kristen,